Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to give everyone just another minute or so to go ahead and log into the webinar before we begin. But I do want to draw your attention, for those of you that are already on, that in the GoToWebinar control panel that you will see, there is a questions section within that dashboard that I want to encourage you to use throughout the webinar. We are going to be opening up 2 question and answer periods after each speaker today. So if you could utilize that section in the dashboard to submit your questions, that would be great. We would really love questions for each of these speakers and make sure that we get the content that you're looking for. So I'm just going to give it one more minute before we start to allow people to go ahead and log in. If you're just joining us, we're just allowing people a few extra seconds to log in. If anyone else is like me, it seems like all of my video calls are back to back, or webinars are back to back. So we're going from one to the next one, and there's not often time to even think about it before your calendar pops up and you have to jump into another video call. So just allowing people a few extra seconds to log in to the GoToWebinar app and get ready for our speakers today. All right, it looks like we have lots of people on already, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with the interest of time. Just again, want to say good morning and welcome you all to the California Trailblazer series presented by Shift3 Technologies. Today, we had planned to be in the city of Merced, known as the gateway to Yosemite, but unfortunately, most of us are working remote. And that's okay, because we have technology on our side, which is allowing us to continue to get this great information out to all of you in hopes that it can be immediately put to use in your organization to increase user adoption, increase efficiency, and to get your Salesforce org operating at the levels you had always expected it would. So we're thankful that you all joined us for today's webinar, and we're looking forward to the speakers that we have lined up for today. Here's just a quick overview of our agenda. We will be, our keynote will be from James Broadley. After James does his presentation, we're going to open it up for questions for him. So again, if you were not on the call at the beginning, I want to draw your attention to the GoToWebinar control panel. In that, there is a section called questions. I encourage you to utilize that questions section to send any questions that you might have for James. Again, we'll ask and answer those right after his presentation, and then later in our webinar, we will have questions and answers for Christian as well. At the end, I will introduce JP, who will give a quick overview of Shift3 Technologies. And if you have not been on one of our webinars before, I encourage you to stay all the way to the end of the webinar so that we can get you some information about how to receive a gift that we would love to send you. So let me introduce our keynote speaker for today. James Broadley is a dynamic bilingual leader with impressive international skills and experience in finance and accounting, business planning and strategy, business metrics and benchmarking, information technology, human resources, business development, sales and marketing, production, and supply chain. He is an accomplished global consumer product chartered accountant who has lived and worked in South Africa, the United Kingdom, Europe, and the United States. Wow. And with that, I'm going to turn today's keynote over to James.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's kind of weird looking at my screen because I can't see anybody. So I don't know whether you can see me or my screen. So hopefully you can. I guess the reason why Janae invited me to present today was because we are located in Merced, California. And even though you probably aren't, I guess it kind of stuck with me, and I'm sorry that you're not here. We were looking to try and organize the facility at the newest University of California in Merced, which has just undergone its 2020 program to double the size of the campus, and everybody's super excited. They just yesterday announced a new chancellor. And so there's a lot of dynamism going around the campus, as well as the city of Merced, which currently is tracking as the fastest growing city in California. Anyway, that's our claim to fame, and we're sticking to it. So I happen to live in Merced. I was headhunted. I was running an artisanal bread company in New York for a few years, and headhunted to come out here. I've now been here for 7.5 years and thoroughly enjoying it. It's Central Valley of California wasn't necessarily high on my list of priorities in terms of places to live, but I really enjoy the lifestyle out here and the people and what is going on in the valley, which is very exciting. So I'm just going to take you through who we are. Joseph Gallo Farms. We were founded by Joseph E. Gallo. That's him down in the bottom right of the scene. He's the youngest of the three Gallo brothers, Ernest, Julio, and Joseph. Ernest and Julio stayed on, and E&J Gallo is the largest wine business in the world, with wineries all over the world and a lot of different wine brands that they continue to develop and or purchase. And Joseph, being a much younger brother, grew up with his brothers because his parents died, and he worked in the winery business for many years with his brothers. His passion, though, was always dairy. He really liked cows and livestock and so on, and he started to buy tracts of land west of Merced, sort of in the Atwater, Livingston area, which is where he was living because that's where a big E&J Gallo facility is in Livingston. And so he bought lots of land and started buying and raising cows. And at that time, he had numerous dairies and was really supplying fluid milk into outside of California. And at some point in time, decided to get into subsequent processing of that milk and built a cheese plant and subsequently a whey protein plant. And that's now really the business that we're in. We make a range of American-style branded cheese products, from sort of small retail-sized chunks to shredded cheese to sliced cheese to a variety of mozzarella balls and so on. And we go upwards into the deli area to the 4-pound, 6-pound type loaves. And we're predominantly in the southwestern areas of the United States, California, Arizona, Nevada, but we also do a lot of business in Mexico. So we export a lot of our cheeses to Mexico. We're a mid-sized, privately owned family business. Joseph Gallo passed away in 2007, and his son, Mike Gallo, is the CEO, and he and his sister are the two primary owners of the business. We're now in our fourth generation, and Mike actually has two of his sons working in this business, learning the ropes, and will at some future point in time presumably take over running the company. They've always been very philanthropic as a family, and that is something that is very much part of the backbone. They support the community. A lot of the early startup were people who were employed from the community itself, and these people came in and worked in this company. A lot of them worked for 35, 40 years in this company. We still have people who are in the 35 plus, 40 plus year bracket right now. And the philanthropy has really given back. They've given back. They donated wings at the hospital. They donated the student union at the University of Merced. There's a lot of opportunities to give back into our small farming community. And as I said earlier, we're located in Atwater and Livingston predominantly. We have a series of core values. We have 5 core values. And these really underpin our vision and mission statement that we have for the company. And it's not surprising to have a couple of them, like quality and integrity and so on and so forth. A lot of corporations have those particular values, but we have service in there. Service is something that every department or division in the company has customers. Finance, for example, has customers throughout the business. We supply them with accurate, up-to-date information in a format that they need. The mechanics have the plants as their customers. The sales force have obviously normal external customers. So we're all servicing somebody, and that's the kind of we want to make sure that we're providing a good quality service to people. Family is important, not only because it is a family business, but we also employ a lot of family members, whether they're husbands and wives, fathers and daughters, and so on and so forth. We have a lot of family members in here, and we enjoy the family outings through annual picnics and so on and so forth that we have to celebrate the kind of the family aspect of this company. And the one I also like is balance. Balance is kind of like the yin and yang of our business. You know, we're predominantly agricultural based, so everything's for the long term. You know, you don't just plow the land and expect the crops to be there the next day. It all takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of cultivation. It takes a lot of care and so on and so forth to raise these crops. And so there is this balance between, you know, land mitigation, natural habitat, as well as productive fields and environments that we can make money. These values are an important tool for people coming into the company to understand our culture. And I worked for the Mars Corporation for 10 years in different parts of the world. They had 5 principles. And, you know, before we could even answer a telephone in the company, we had to go through the corporate lobotomy to understand what these 5 principles were all about. And that took a 2 to 3 day process. So whether you were in Australia or Sweden or France or United States, we all went through the process of learning these 5 principles. And although we don't have it quite to the same extent here, because this is a relatively new kind of set of values to this company, we do take people through it on their onboarding process. This sort of icon is supposed to be like a porthole in a ship where you've got the visibility through that window onto what lies beyond. This logo is kind of posted everywhere, in every meeting room, everywhere throughout the business. And it's also built into our annual appraisal process. So it's very much relevant to how we operate within the business. So briefly now, what do? Well, we make a variety of world-class branded cheese products, and we have won over the years numerous gold, silver, bronze medals for a variety of different cheeses that we produce. Not only domestically, but we have won world championships, which are done in England and France. We have a world champion. The extra sharp cheddar is a world champion. Our pepper jack is a world champion, and so on. So we have, because it's got the name of the family on it, it's very important that we make high quality products. We also, as a byproduct of the cheese making facility, we produce whey protein ingredient products and a variety. We were very early in the production of whey protein isolate, which goes into power bars and into sports drinks, muscle building drinks, and so on. And we have a variety of different whey protein products, and including animal feed and so on. So that's more of an ingredient business as opposed to a packaged business. We also grow almonds, and we moved out of the dairy livestock business a few years ago, looking at the footprint in California and what was going on in the dairy business. We decided to move more into diversification of permanent crops, and we chose almonds. I don't know how much you all know about almonds, but California produces, in the Central Valley area, produces about 86% of the world's almonds. And so almonds are a very, very big business in the Central Valley. We now have about 3,500 acres of almonds. We're now at a point where the crop is now becoming quite sizable and becoming more of a material contributor to our business in terms of profitability and cash flow. So almonds are very important. They're much more stable than obviously dealing in the milk business. We also have a division where we buy, develop, lease, and sell real estate. And we have a lot of real estate. As I mentioned, Joseph Gallo, initially he was buying a lot of land in the sort of early 1940s, 1950s. And a lot of that land was really agricultural to support the dairies that he had. But since then, we have worked with the cities, and we've got commercial and residential properties as well that we buy and develop and sell on. And we're sustainable in that we create our own renewable energy to run our cheese plant, to run our whey protein plant, to run all the wells and the farming aspects. We have an anaerobic digester where we create all of our own electricity through waste water that comes out of the cheese plant and flows through the dairy. And so really it's the creating methane gas from the dairy cow poop, really. So that's kind of an efficient use of that. And everything we do, we try to minimize waste. So that's kind of a bit of a background on who we are, what we do. So how do we use technology? And what I did was I kind of looked at the different aspects of the business and looked at some examples of how we use technology. So just in cheese making, for example, in the top left-hand corner, we use Microsoft Navision as our ERP system. And that really underpins everything we do in terms of all transactions, all movements of product, and so on and so forth. It's the primary source of all information. What we wanted to do very early on is to make sure, well, before we had this and before it was a totally integrated system, we had a lot of pockets of Access databases and Excel databases and so on and so forth that had all sorts of information. And of course, no surprise, that we were all singing off different hymn books, and all the information was different and so on. So what we wanted to do when we re-implemented NAV back in 2017, we wanted to make sure that we rolled it out as a totally integrated corporate ERP, where it would be the primary source of all data, and then from there you could have SQL databases that you could feed Power BI type applications and the like. So this really has worked well for us, because with the development of Microsoft Office in the cloud, 365, that's all totally integrated with Navision. And now the Power BI is also a part of Navision. So all of that integration, you can be looking at aspects within the general ledger. You can just drag it, drop it into an Excel or a PowerPoint or a BI system, and that's very useful and efficient for us as we operate in a kind of a integrated fashion. So right from the very outset, what do we do to make cheese? Well, we receive milk. And in the old days, with all the dairies that we used to have, we used to provide at least 100% of our milk needs. Now, of course, we've sold off all those dairies. And so now we're buying 100% of our milk. And so we got milk trucks coming in, 24/7, 365 days a year. And one of the first things we do is we open up the top, and we take samples of the milk. We run it through our analytic systems to make sure that the milk is the right temperature, the right quality. We look at what the components are in terms of butterfats, proteins, and so on. And then, of course, that's already now feeding in to Navision. So every receipt of milk comes in, all the components associated with that milk come in and are tracked through Navision right from the very outset. So now the milk goes into silos, and once they're in silos, we can obviously track that for things like tracking and product recall purposes. We know exactly where the milk came from, what the components were when we received it, et cetera, et cetera. If ever there was a recall aspect, we can go right back to the dairyman who supplied us with that milk. So it's very important to understand that Microsoft is, the dynamics aspect of it is flowing right through all the plants itself. On the top there, you can see blocks of cheese, which is really what we're making is 40-pound blocks of cheese kind of flowing through. And every time it's passing sensors, it's feeding information back into Navision. So it's whether it's got printing on the box that's going on, it's already feeding that back. It's counting the number of the quantities, the type of cheese, et cetera, the dates. It's also tracking things like quantities that we're producing, the yields from the cheese. So in other words, what yield are we getting from that component of milk? The amount of trim that comes off. Every aspect of cheese making is being tracked in Navision. And then from there, we have a whole lot of Power BI applications where we're really looking at that data in an information way that is linked to metrics and KPIs and targets and so on and so forth. And so we have a series of daily operating reports in each of the different plants, and they can see how they're doing by line, by type of product, by day, by hour, by shift, by whatever they want to look at that's important relative to their metrics. The one that I'm showing has got the robot there is really, we invested in a high-speed robotic chunk line a few years ago. So it's kind of robots at one end, which is taking off of the cardboard boxes, because of course when you make cheese, the cheese has got to sit for about 20 days to meld into cheese from the kind of the whey curds that it had before. And it's got to meld into the cheese that you put on the table. And so that process chemically takes about 20 days. So we're going to be cutting that cheese from about that time. And so the front end robots are taking off of the cardboard boxes, taking off the plastic shrimp wrap bags, and then flowing it through the packaging line where we're going to be cutting it into 8-ounce chunks, into 1 pound, into 2 pound, and so on and so forth. And then right through to the end where it's coming out as a packaged carton. You can see in the bottom area that's supposed to simulate the final product coming out in a packaged carton. And then it goes into our warehouse. We have a finished goods warehouse. And of course, everything is bar-coded, and the forklift trucks are linked to Navision and to our warehouse locator system. So wherever they put that pallet will be located within Nav, so we would know exactly where that pallet was and how to get it, because obviously everything that we do is on a FIFO basis, and so we need to be able to bring out the pallet to fill a customer's order and to fill a truck accordingly. So hopefully that kind of gives you some idea. There is so much technology to speak of, but I just want to give you some aspects of it. And obviously down the bottom left, you've got some examples of our cheese next door to Tillamook cheese, I see there. Obviously, all of that is barcoded. We get information into our CRM system, and you're talking more about Salesforce here. We're actually one generation pre-Salesforce, because we've never really used Salesforce. I wanted to put Salesforce into our company about 7 years ago, because my company that I was running in New York, we had Salesforce, and it really worked very well for us. But here there was a different culture, and particularly with the salesmen, they were initially very resistant to this kind of system. So we have built our own CRM app, just to cover the basics of what we do. But one of the things we can do with it is we can track all the competitive product that's in the marketplace, and what the prices are, what they're doing, whether they're promotions, and so on and so forth. So that's another bit of technology that we use with our salesmen and with our brokers. So moving on, how do we use technology in the almond area? Well, this slide really starts in the middle. It's part of the Almond Board of California. Almond Board of California is there. Every grower has to pay 3 cents a pound for every pound that we produce of almonds. We have to pay the board 3 cents a pound, and that all goes to help the marketing, underpin the marketing investments that we make around the world to promote California almonds. And so that's a pretty good use of money. But it also covers the cost of legislation, all the legislative information that comes out all the time. The Almond Board dissects that and provides all the growers and producers with that information. It's corporate guidance as well, about corporate guidance of the whole almond industry. And at the last, they have an annual almond conference in Sacramento. And at the last conference, they announced these 2025 goals. And the 2025 goals were all about reduction of water, reduction of harvest dust, because I don't know whether you've seen during the harvest, the sweepers and shakers that go up and down the fields create a tremendous amount of dust. And obviously people are concerned about pest management as well, and waste. And so I just wanted to identify in this chart here that we're actually in the top left-hand corner. We're very concerned about water with the new Sigma Act that's in play now. Is going to reduce significantly the amount of water going to be available to the Central Valley. And so everything we do is making sure that we don't overwater and we don't underwater. And so what we have in the top left-hand corner, we have these moisture probes, and I'm talking about the technology we use. We have these moisture probes that are underground, about 2 feet underground, over the 3,500 acres that we have. So we have them in all the fields. And these probes are linked to a central computer in those ranches, in those fields. And it tells the fertigation system that based on the moisture that is in that part of the field, it needs more juice. And it's linked to the weather system as well. So if obviously we're planning on some rain, it's not going to be sending the juice to that area because it knows it's going to rain that afternoon. But in the event of no rain and the fact that it's really dry, it will send a message to our central fertigation system to send a certain amount of juice to that part of the field to get back to the level of moisture that it should be. And so all of this is controlled by a series of computers linked to all our fertigation tanks with the various chemicals and nutrients and so on that go to each plant. So we're not, in the old days, they used to flood irrigate fields. Now we've got actual drip feed that go to every single tree. So we're only using water in a very efficient way for each tree and not wasting that water. In the top right, I talked about the harvesting dust. It's a goal to reduce this dust. And we've invested in low dust harvesters. So these harvesters now can contain that dust and minimize it, and thereby meeting one of the 2025 goals. Down the bottom left, pest management. Environmentally friendly pest management tools. We use Cetera puffers and traps, which are out in the fields that are environmentally friendly and can trap all sorts of gophers and or orange worm and various different things that attack your plants and eat the nuts and so on and so forth. So this is all done in a very environmentally friendly way. And in the bottom right, only the almonds themselves and the hulls actually leave our property. The rest of it is basically it's tilled back into the soil and used as a compost for the almond trees themselves. So we don't have any waste in that area. Continuing on with the almonds, I mentioned these moisture sensors. There's a picture of gentleman looking at these, the actual reader of that. You can see it's a solar-powered sensor, and that's obviously feeding information back to the central computers. One of the other interesting things we came across a couple of years ago at the Almond conference is a series of technology coming out with beehive sensors. And this was a very clever app developed by UC Davis. And we spend over $1 million a year on renting beehives. And we only need them for about 6 weeks during the bloom. And we put these beehives out. You've probably seen them on the side of the road. There's examples of them on the left-hand side. And they are there to pollinate the almond trees during that kind of critical bloom period. And so the beehive sensors is it's a little gadget that fits onto your iPhone. And you can walk up to a beehive within, say, 10, 15 feet of that beehive. You don't want to get too close. And you can read the level of health of that beehive. And so obviously if it's red, it means that there's a lot of energy in that beehive. The temperature is right, because obviously there's a lot of bees buzzing around and they create heat. But obviously, on the other hand, if you go up to a beehive and it's green, that means it's pretty well dead. There's nobody flying around in there. And so that's where you can go back at a very early stage to the people that you're renting these hives from and say, look, we've got thousands of beehives here, and 30% of them are either dead or they are, not looking good. And so this is a service that we have, so that they come out and they do these tests all the time, and it's all GPS related, so they know exactly which beehive it is, where they're located, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very useful bit of technology. Top right, fertigation controls. This is the where the different chemicals and nutrients that are mixed, that go out into the fields, and at different times of the year and in different ages and stages of the plants, they get different measures of nitrogen and phosphorus and so on and so forth that go onto the plants. And so this is all done through tablets linked to the central ranch fertigation system. And so that's very interesting. You can see, obviously, through that, how you're doing with yields, what you're actually using, how much it's costing, when you're doing it, and so on. So all this data comes back into information that we use to continually improve our farming and our yields and the health of the trees. The bottom right is a new almond management system we've just put in called Conservis. There are a few different almond management systems out there. We looked at pretty much all of them, and we liked Conservis. Here, it really tracks everything that you do in the field, from all the chemicals you use. It's got the GPS visuals of your individual fields that you've got planted. It knows the age and stage of them, tracks what you're putting on there. It generates work orders for people. And obviously, when you come to harvest, it's tracking how much you're actually harvesting and so on. So it's a very comprehensive system that there again links with our ERP system, because the ERP system is really, in this case, tracking predominantly transactions. But here we're tracking information that is operational, that's out in the field, that we don't need to keep in our ERP system. So we will be exporting out of a SQL database into here information relative to costs that are needed for the operators, the farming people to know how they're tracking against budget, by acre, by year, by this, that, and the other. So it's kind of an interesting system. All right, moving on to renewable energy. I'm looking at the time now. We've got 20 minutes left, but I want to leave some time if there are any questions, maybe. So this is renewable energy. As I mentioned earlier, we have an anaerobic digester on the top left, which is about a 12-acre pond covered with a tarpaulin, as you can see. And through that, all the waste water comes down. We separate the solids from the water, from the liquid, and the liquid flows into here and flows around in a kind of a canal underneath that tarpaulin. And all the microbes and everything that are in there create this gas. And you can see some of them are elevated there, and that's the methane gas that's being created from this waste stream. And that is now pumped back to the cheese plant, and you can see in the top middle, it says generators create power. We've got 4 generators there that are running on methane gas. So they're using that gas to run, and through that, they generate all the power that we need to run the cheese plant and the whey protein plant. And we use a lot of energy. We have dryers, so when the whey protein comes out, it comes out as a liquid. We then dry that into a powder, and that obviously uses a lot of energy. And on the top right was a very interesting project that we did. We got a grant from the state of California to do this. We actually, from these generators in the middle, we capture the heat exhaust coming off of these generators, and we convert that into chilled water. So we have a capture system which you can't actually see there above that red generator, but it's capturing the exhaust gas, the hot exhaust gas coming off of that generator, and it's turning it into the top right hand. That's a chiller up in the top there, and it's receiving that hot gas and turning it into chilled water, which we then run through the plants, the cheese plant and the whey protein plant, to provide a constant temperature that we need for making cheese and whey protein. What you don't want to have, particularly in the summertime here, where it can get upwards of 110 degrees, you don't want that kind of temperature in your cheese plant. You want to keep it down in the 40s. And so we have this ability to keep a constant flow of chilled water. On the bottom right, we put in a 2-megawatt solar farm quite a few years ago. It was the largest privately owned solar farm at that time. And we create a lot of power. There again, we're using that power predominantly for the farming aspects of what we do. All the pumps that we have a lot of wells and pumps and other things around the farm that need power, and that's being sourced predominantly from that solar farm. I don't know whether you can see, but right in the middle, there's a little puff of smoke coming up, and that's actually where the cheese plant is. So we're on about 10,000 acres of land here, and in this particular area with sort of contiguous ranches. So it's quite a large piece of property. And then in the bottom left, I mentioned earlier sustainability with the cow waste, and we're very concerned about the ecology and the habitat. We have a lot of areas that are just for wildlife and for ducks and geese and waterfowl, and we're very sort of environmentally friendly in that regard. And as I said, the cow waste goes through the anaerobic digester to create energy. So I think that's, oh no, we got one more, which is just a list of Power BI applications that we have in the different areas of the business. We've got, accounts payable, receivables, energy, finance, freight, everything, all on that list there. And under the sales, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but we have our own little CRM system. But I think that what's going to happen is that we, over time, once the salespeople are more used to a structured environment like that, that we would probably migrate to Salesforce. But this is an interim step to get them into that mode. So I think we got to a point of almost measuring dust. So we kind of went a little overboard with some of the systems that we have out there. I think people got excited and carried away by the tools that we have to turn that data into information. And now we've kind of started to step back a little bit and really redefine some of our KPIs and metrics that are really important to us. Because I think what was tending to happen is we were having too much information, and it was a little bit too difficult to determine what was really critical to the business and what was just interesting. So I run a KPI operational meeting every 2 weeks. As I said, these people are using these systems every day, but we have a formal meeting where we look at all the key components, the key KPIs, and we have discussion about that. In fact, it's coming up next week. So with that, I think I'm going to open it up for if there are any questions. We have a few minutes, I think, Janae. So I'll be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Perfect. All right, James. Well, thank you for walking us all through your operation. I'm sure there are many people on this call that are seeing the enormous amounts of data that your company is generating and thinking, wow, this is perfect for Salesforce. So I'm glad there at the end you said that it's probably, your company is probably going through an evolution of where Salesforce may be pulled back in, and maybe your custom CRM, you might outgrow that at some point here soon.
Right.
We have a few questions.
I think we have to do baby steps.
Yes. Yes. A few questions that we have for you. Why do you feel it's so critical to invest in technology for cheese production?
Well, I think any kind of production today needs technology. And what's really interesting is, when I first arrived in the Central Valley 7.5 years ago, you're just driving along country roads or state roads, and you're looking at these farmers on either side, and that's about as much thought as I gave to them. What you're actually doing is you're driving down these roads, and each one of these farms is like $500 million or more of investment and technology. We have Foster Farms as one of our neighbors. That's a multi-billion-dollar company producing chickens and turkeys and so on. We have Dole Foods as one of our other neighbors, making all sorts of fruit products. We have Hilmar Cheese, the world's largest cheese production company, as one of our neighbors. So we're all, all these little farming companies, agricultural-based companies, are now producing, high-quality food products, which obviously require food standards like SQF certifications and so on and so forth. And through that, you have to have technology to produce high quality, measure it, know what you're talking about. We're competing with experts in much larger companies, and we need to know what's going on to be able to compete with these people. So we need that technology. When people were paid $7 an hour and we were running dairies, and people were in those days being paid $7 an hour. It wasn't a big deal to have a lot of people. But now, with the wage rates today, with the healthcare costs, with the workers' compensation costs, we're having to add 65% onto that wage to compensate for what the fringe benefits plus the actual cost is really to us. So when we look at that overall cost with the numbers of people that we have, we used to have, when I was here, over 500 people in the company. We're now at 250. And part of that is through technology is trying to find out how you can produce more faster with less cost. You want to do the lowest cost per pound. How do you do that? Look at the different components of that, what you're buying, how you're buying, and how do you get it out of the door and onto the shelf in an affordable way. So yeah, technology is very important. That high-speed chunk line was a big investment for us, and everything that we do now. In the old days, that line took 45 people on that line, and now it's got 6 people running that line. And in my opinion, we only really need 4. When I was at Mars, we used to design what we called the dark factory. So that meant that whatever factory you were creating, whether it's a candy factory, a pet food factory, you had to design it with no people in it. That was the mandate going in, was that there was going to be no people in that factory. And I remember years ago, I was in Verden in Germany at a really high-tech pet food plant that we had there. It was really impressive. All the can came in rolled steel. We made all our own cans automatically through the factory. The meat and everything that came in was processed and packed, and all the pallets were loaded into a truck in 30 seconds. And there were 4 people in the whole factory, and it was one of our largest factories in Germany. So it was really, I think when you look at that, coming back to cheese, we're still a little bit slow in that area. And there again, it's a private company. We don't have access to just raising cash, so we can do it in a way that we can afford to do it. And sometimes we have to wait to be able to put a project together. Sometimes we can get a grant for it. So if and when, we're always looking for opportunities to improve on the technology.
Great, thank you, James. I think you actually answered one of the other questions that we had on here. How do you obtain grants for these types of technological investments?
Well, it's a search process. I mean, the grants are available. It's all public information. And so sometimes we employ individuals, grant writers, and so on, to go do searches for grants in a particular area of technology that we want to get into. And then depending on the level of interest, the amount of money available, we will then go after those grants, and we'll pay somebody to write the grant on our behalf. That's not one of our expertise, core strengths. So we would actually pay for that. And we've actually just been awarded a $3.5 million grant to build a new digester. And now it's a question of, well, are we going to do it or not? But that's a different thing. But yeah. I think it's rather like,
all right, James.
College kids. There are scholarships for anything and everything, and it's a matter of knowing where to look and how to find them.
Absolutely. All right, James. Well, appreciate your time this morning. It's been very enlightening on how you're utilizing technology to run an operation there in Merced. So again, thank you for your time this morning. And any questions that I receive via email, I will forward on to you.
Thank you, Janae. I appreciate you inviting me to present, and I hope it was of some interest to people.
Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, so just a reminder before I introduce our next speaker, the GoToWebinar control panel has a questions module within it. So I encourage you to utilize that for any questions that you might have as our next speaker goes through his information for you. So I want to introduce our next speaker now, Christian Quello. Christian joined the Salesforce ecosystem last May and hasn't looked back. As a Salesforce developer and certified admin with Shift3 Technologies, he specializes in automations and integrations with the aim of eliminating duplicate data entry and saving the user time. With Christian, when Christian is not working, you can find him at the movies, line dancing, or on a beach, even if at this time it's only in his head. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Christian, unless you're at the beach or line dancing. Maybe he is, since I don't hear him.
Nope, I'm here. Was taking a little mini vacation, but I am here. All right. So welcome everyone. Thanks for coming to hear my talk. A little bit about myself, like Janae covered, that was a great introduction. Again, I've been in the ecosystem of Salesforce for about a year now. On our team, I mostly focus on automations, so using formulas, using Process Builder to help clients get the most out of Salesforce, get some of these built-in functionalities doing the work for them. I also help on our development side, creating APIs that get that information into Salesforce and just present all that information to our clients. So for today's talk, I'm talking about formulas. I'm going to go over the basics of formulas, the real power of them and how you can use them in your org and make them within a few clicks. There's some special formulas I'd like to talk about as well. Those would be using images to convey data. So not just using the text values, but using images to pass that information along, as well as how to use IDs and data you may be keeping in your Salesforce org and how to use that to connect to web pages, making the workflow for your clients easy to switch between Salesforce and any outside application as well. So just a little bit about formulas before we dig into them too deep here. If you haven't used formulas before in your org, formulas are the base level and the most straightforward of Salesforce's automation tools. This is kind of the first step when you're trying to automate something. It's where you look to first. You can kind of think of these formulas as similar to Excel formulas, if you ever have used those. A lot of the concepts you see in Excel formulas, traditional coding languages, or mathematics, just those basic math operations, you can find in a Salesforce formula. Also, what's good about knowing how to use formulas, just the syntax of it, is in Salesforce, that syntax keeps showing up over and over and over. You find it in many of the automation tools, many of the filtering tools. So just knowing these basic concepts can apply to many parts of your org. So today we're going to talk about formula fields specifically. Formula fields, like I said, are those calculations at the record level. So they takes the data that's associated with your record, your information, does some math or does some operations to it, and returns you a new result. So that kind of helps automate maybe some of the processes that you have in your org. The fields that it can access, like I said, are the fields on that current record, as well as the parent records that are associated with it. So if there's a relationship between the record you're on and the record above it, you can go ahead and grab that information, pull it down, do that calculation, and get a result. So if you're wondering what data types or trying to think of what you can do with a formula, it's good to know what formulas can return back to you. So on the slide here, you can see the different types. I'm not going to go into too much detail on some of these, but I will highlight some common ones. The checkbox, so the typical yes, no Boolean result is very common. It's a good way at a glance to see all the different calculations and settings, currency for any type of money calculations, number, as well as text. So getting some different text results like links and just putting some strings together. So as you can see, there are lots of different options. Great tool to use. So when you're making formulas, there's I think some key tips and tricks to having good formulas in your org so that others can use them, or even for yourself, so you can easily read and review a formula you've made. So on this slide, the top section here is a formula, and it's not styled very well. It's all one line with lots of parentheses and commas, and it's really hard to actually read maybe what's happening. And you can imagine in more complicated formulas, this could be huge. And if you don't style it, you get this just mass of data, and it's hard to pick out any syntax errors or any problems if you do have them. So that first one, not so great. If you look at the bottom here, it's the same formula, but it's formatted much better, that I can see that inside this and statement, we have is blank and active. If that returns true, we do missing date. If it's false, it's not applicable. So like I said, this bottom version is what I shoot for when we do formulas. We try to keep it styled well, especially if there's multiple people, or just good practice to keep your formulas clean. So that way, if I make a formula today and I need to make a change a year from now, I want to be able to read it quickly and know what's happening, instead of having to spend maybe 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it takes to break down a complicated formula that's formatted poorly. So another key trick when I teach formulas to those who are new to them is people tend to get into a cycle of if this, do this, if this, do that. And that's good programming thinking. But sometimes using if statements when there's other options available can be a mistake. So if you're looking at this slide over here, these if statements, again, both functions are doing the same thing. But if you look at the if statement version here, actually, I'll describe the case first, then we'll go to the complicated one. So we'll clarify a little bit. So on the case here, you have a pick list value, which is called type. And then each value, if the type was electrical, then we return the number 1. If it was mechanical, 3. And if there's none of these 4 values, there's kind of a catch-all on case, and that's this 5. So if none of the other 4 are selected, we return 5. And this if statement on the other side is doing the same thing, but it's just more complicated. It's the same logic. And in formulas, you can do things multiple ways. But when I teach formulas, I like to always highlight the value of case statements, and that they can be more efficient. Because comparing these two, the if statements here over here on the right, you have these is pick vals. So it's another function. So you add more commas, more parentheses. You also have to nest the ifs inside of each other. So you see how all these parentheses add up on the end. So again, same type of thing as the styling. If you can use a case, it's preferred, just because it tends to keep your formulas cleaner and easier to read. Another place that can cause trouble for people and can be confusing with formulas are date and time fields. Salesforce has 3 different return values in formulas that cover time. You have your dates, your date time, and your time. And doing a date minus a date, pretty straightforward. If I were to do today minus yesterday, it'll turn 1. Pretty straightforward. Things start getting complicated when either you start mixing the two, mixing dates with date times, because you have to do some conversions, and the same thing using time. And so that's something to be aware of. But one of the key problems with the date time specifically is it can be confusing what it returns. So if I did that same situation I was talking about with today minus yesterday, returns 1. For a date time, that would not exactly be the same case. So for a date time, it returns a decimal value for the date and the time together. So in this example here that I mentioned, if the value is 3.52 that comes out, if you subtract 2 dates, that actually represents 3 days, 12 hours. 12 hours is half of a day, so that's where the 0.5 comes from, and 29 minutes. So as you can see, using a date time can be a bit confusing, and you can convert some of that, but generally I recommend always, if you can, using dates. If you need the date, if you need the time part of a date, you can do it, and it's doable. But I recommend if you just need the dates, stick to dates. It helps keep that data cleaner and a little easier to understand. So finally, before we get into our demo portion of this talk, I want to mention some final gotcha, some issues when you're first learning about formulas. Salesforce has 2 formula editors that I'm going to be demonstrating, but we always use the advanced formula editor. You may be thinking as a formula beginner that simple formula editor might be where I want to start. The problem with that is that simple formula editor actually cuts out a lot of functions, so a lot of the functionality of formulas is missing. The things you can insert from your record are missing as well. So it may make you think, oh, I can't do this in a formula. But really, if you just stay in the advanced formula editor, you'll still see all that functionality you need. And there's not really much of a visual difference. And I'll also add, Salesforce almost always defaults to that advanced formula editor. So I would just stick with that and avoid the simple one. Another thing to be aware of, just like any automation, any tool you're using, formulas and the functions that make up the formulas, they do have limits. Some can only return certain values. So it's good to be aware of that as you come across them, and resources that you can use to fix them and correct them, which we'll also see in this presentation. One final note I'll add that I've seen in our org and maybe some client orgs as well is you need to be careful using formulas when referencing that parent. That relationship is great and you can get good calculations. But if, for instance, if I was to change something up on the parent record, it affects the calculation for everything below it. So if I want to keep the history tracking of something, if I had some object, some record from a year ago, that calculation, that change I made up on top gets carried down. So it's important to remember that and to consider that when doing that reference up to a parent. That if I'm concerned about a change losing my history, that's something I need to consider when making that formula. So with that, I think it's time we do a little building. So I'm going to go ahead and go to our next slide here and look at one of our requirements. I want to do a little bit requirement-driven building so we can see some kind of real-life scenarios that an admin would face. So for this one, looks like we have a automation here they'd like to do, GeekWise Academy. They have a cost of a class, but since they also want to charge for textbooks and software now, maybe in the future, but they want to account for that. So they basically want to make a new total cost field, and they maybe want to add a default value. Well, that, excuse me, would be perfect for formulas. Let's go ahead and slide over to Salesforce. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that classes object. And I already have a class built here, so let's go ahead and look at it. Before we get into building, I'll let you look and see the different fields we have on our class object here. So we have the start date of a class, an end date, the class nights, the name of the class, just some basic info, scheduled time. And there's that class cost field right there on right above that website information is class cost. So we know we want to use that field because we want to make a new total cost field. So that's something we are going to want to use when we start building. I always recommend getting a good look at the object before you build. That way you understand what they're talking about, what the requirement is, and what options are already built in. You never want to duplicate the same work if someone's done something already. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and go to setup, and we'll start building towards this requirement. So once you're in setup, we're going to go ahead and go to our object manager. Let that spin up here for a minute. Let me try giving that a refresh here because it doesn't seem to want to load. There we go. Gotta love live demos. Nothing's quite as nervous as waiting on something to load. I'm gonna go ahead and go to our class object and the fields and relationships. So here's all those fields we just saw on the front end. Now we're looking at them a little more here on the back end. And we want to go ahead and make those two new fields, which would be the textbook cost and the software cost. So those are not formulas, those are just basic fields. So I'm going to go ahead and select currency because that's going to be a dollar value. And I'm going to call the first one, let's go with software cost. And now a key here is to realize that the default for currency that Salesforce does is a length of 18. That's the max any number can be. So that's everything before the decimal. But for a currency, we have at least two values on the decimal side. So I change that to 16, make the decimals 2. So then we have a nice full currency. And for software costs, they asked us to default it to 25. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and put 25. I can show the full formula editor, so you can see a little bit if you need to do some more complicated default values. But for this is just a straight number, so I'm just going to go ahead and put that in. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the next screens. The default visibility is perfect for us as well. I want them on my layouts, so I'll save. So that's our one field that we need. We also need the textbook costs. So I'm going to go ahead and start making that one. Again, currency. That's the name of this one will be textbook cost. And again, that length of 16 with a decimal value of 2. This one, we're going to do no default value. They didn't have a specified number. And so we'll leave that one blank. And we'll go through these screens as well. We're good with the default options on there. All right, so now that we have those two fields, we've done the prep work to make our actual formula now. So let's go ahead and click new again. But this time we're going to go ahead and select the formula. All right, so now that we're in the formula, I'm going to give it a name. We're going to call it total class cost. Whoop, I had to spell class right. That'd be important. Go ahead and fix that. Make sure that populates right over there. Perfect. And again, this is a currency. You notice here that it defaults to 2, so that's nice. So when you're doing formulas, you at least get that default 2 like you would expect. All right, so here's our first look at that advanced formula editor. Like I said, it defaults to the advanced. The simple ones faded out, and I wouldn't even bother going to that tab. I'll show you it quickly. But I would really just stay over here. So on the advanced formula editor, there's a couple of things I want to point out before we get into building. We have all our functions that we can do with a formula, all the built-in, if I want to make an image, the if statement, all these built-in things are over here on the right where it says functions, a little window. You can also filter them. If I just want to see the logical ones, I can filter that, or I can go back to all. And they're all listed in ABC order. So if you know what the function's called, you can scroll down or even use the keyboard to get to it faster. In typical Salesforce fashion, Salesforce always promotes what they call clicking and not coding. So they have the ability for you to insert your operators. If you want to use click methods, I tend to prefer to type them. But if you're new, this may be useful. If I know I want to add, I can click on it. It'll insert that in there. Same thing with these functions over here. If you click on them, it'll insert them in. And we'll be showing that in some other demonstrate other parts of this demo. And finally, this last part over here is our insert field. This is where we actually get our different records, that our different fields, excuse me, on a record. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in before we build here, so that way it's a little easier to read because it might be a little small. All right, so with that, let's build this first one. So we want to do a total cost. So we want to get the class cost, we want to get the textbook cost and the software cost, add those all together. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that field. We know we want the class cost. That one was already made for us, didn't have to build that. I'm going to go ahead and add a plus sign. So that way I can add the next one. The next one is going to be software costs. There's that. And then the final one for this example is going to be a textbook cost. So I'll scroll down, find that textbook cost, insert it in. Before I try and save, I'll check the syntax to make sure there's no mistakes. It says we're all good. If there was an error, it'd show up red. And then before we save, I want to highlight this one section here that says blank field handling. The default is to treat blank fields as zeros, and I typically recommend keeping it that way unless you have a reason not to. So this is the case if, say, software costs or textbook costs had no value, it treats it as zero and will still do the math. If it didn't get treated as zero, the function would break. If it is a null, if you're familiar with that concept, it's like nothing's there, it has no value, and it would just break this function. You can't add a number to some unknown. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. Leave that default visibility and leave those as well. I'm going to decrease my zoom back to normal here so we can see the whole screen. And I'm going to go back to that record now and see our formula. So when you do a formula, you need to go back to the record, you do a refresh so you can see those changes being made. And now we can see that those changes right here, where class cost is, below it we have the new ones. We have software cost, textbook cost, and total cost. That's our calculation. I'm going to go ahead and add a value to the textbook cost so we can see it, make that calculation on the fly. Let's go ahead and add, let's say this class has a textbook cost of $50. We save it and we see that calculation there. If you remember, when we were doing the software cost, I put a default value of 25, and you may be wondering, there's no 25 there, right? It's blank. That's because those default values, they're only on record creation. So if I was to go up here and make a new class, we're going to pick my record type, if you have a record type. I'm going to see that default value populate right there under software costs. And I can change it. If I were to make, I can make it 0 or whatever, but it gives me that default if I know most of the time it's going to be a certain number. So that could be a hiccup if you're expecting that default value to appear on old records. They do not, it's only on creation. So that handles this business requirement. So another business requirement we've been given, let's see, let me read it out here. Hello, we'd like to make some sort of visual way to represent a skill level of a class. Right now, the dropdown pick list field we have for the skill level gets lost in the other fields and often missed. How can we fix this? Okay. P.S. It would be great if we could use this same visual on our website as well to let prospective students know the difficulty of a class they are signing up for. Thanks. Okay, that's something we can definitely do with the formula. Let me go ahead and slide back. So we're staying on this class object. That's great. So we're already familiar with this. I don't have to review anything here. There is this class skill level pick list they were talking about. So let's see what the values are. Beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Okay, 3 values. And I can see kind of what they're saying here. You see this text here, but if there's more text around it or even above it, it's easy to miss. So I think a visual image representation would be awesome. So let's go ahead and go back to setup. And we're going to go ahead and make a formula to show some images for each of those selections. So I'm going to go ahead and go to formula, hit next. And I'm going to call this one class skill icon because we're going to show an icon depending on the skill. And this one's going to be a text value. And you may be thinking, well, an image isn't a text, but the way Salesforce does images, it's a URL. So just like up here in the browser, there's that link. That's how we're going to be grabbing images with the link, so that actually is text. It's just converted when we see it. So back here in our advanced formula editor, we're going to go ahead and find our function we're going to need to make an image happen. And luckily I know that that function is called image. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. And when you insert it, it gives you the skeleton of what the image function needs. So on this image function, we can see the first thing it's asking for is that URL. So that's the link to get the image. Then it's asking for that alternate text, which if you're not familiar on websites, they ask for that alternate text. You may have seen it if an image maybe fails to load. If you use a screen reader, it's what gets translated. So if someone maybe can't see the image, the screen reader will say, oh, this image is a skill icon. And finally, this last parameter here, these brackets, it means they're optional. It's the default height and width. I'm going to go ahead and take that out. We're not going to be using that. So we're just using the image URL and that alternate text. So I already have the image I'd like to use for this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that in so you can see it as well. See the link I'll be using. And if I were to put some alternate text here, that would be it if I wanted one image all the time. It'd be a nice static image, but I want, for this case, it to actually change. So I need to do some logic to help determine what image I actually want and on what conditions. So for that, we're going to go ahead and delete that link for a moment until we put it back in, and go ahead and insert a case statement. So there's the case skeleton. It's now in there. Again, you're seeing how easily and how ugly it can get quickly. These formulas can get, because you see how long that got with the commas. So before I even start building, I'm going to go ahead and format this a bit. If you're familiar with some ways of formatting, you might want to use a tab. The default for Salesforce, if you do a tab, if I do a tab now, it'll take me out of that window. So in formula, if you actually use spaces. So I'm going to go ahead and use 3 spaces. That's just a value I like. You can use 4, but you definitely want to keep a style. So if you have multiple admins, that's a discussion you probably want to have with how many spaces for your formulas. So I'm going to go ahead and format the rest of this. These dots here mean that you can keep doing the same pattern. I'll leave those there for now until we replace them with the values we're going to need. Then we have this else result, which is that, again, that catch-all. And then finally, we had the alternate text from that image. I'm going to go ahead and leave that there, I think, unless I like this a little better. No, it makes me think it's part of the case. I don't want to do that. So we'll just leave that like that. Okay. So for this case statement, we need to check the value, go through the value we're going to be checking. So that's what the expression part is. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a field. And that one for us is going to be the class skill level. So there it is right there. Those are that's the pick list that holds the values, the beginner, intermediate, advanced. So now we have the pick list defined. We need to say what values we're looking to match up with. So I'm going to go ahead and type those in. So we're looking for beginner there. And then we're going to go ahead and return our image link for the beginner value. So I'll go ahead and paste that in. Again, I have these images already, so I'll just paste that one in there. And now for the second value, we're going to do the same thing, except for intermediate. So I'll go ahead and put intermediate in there and throw in this image I want to use when we're in the intermediate case. All right, going down to the next one, we're going to need one more because we're going to be using advanced as well as a value. So I'll go ahead and type that, add that comma, and insert our link. All right, make sure the comma's at the end of that one. We don't need these dots. I'll go ahead and take those out. Take out that line. And now we need to do something with that catch-all, that else result. So in this case, you may be thinking, oh, why didn't you just use advanced for that catch-all? Because everything else besides those first two would be advanced. Excuse me. The problem with that is if it's broken, if for some reason we add a fourth pick list value, I don't want it to default to that advanced. I'd rather have it just break so I know something's wrong. So I'm going to go ahead and put null there, so then it just won't show any image if it's not one of those three values. And that lets me know right away something's wrong, I need to check this. Finally, for this alternate text, let's go ahead and put a value in there. I'm going to put in our class skill level, because that's going to be part of the name depending on what value it is. It needs to adapt, needs to change. So I'm going to go ahead and put class skill level. That's a pick list value, but I need it to be text. So there's a function to convert values into text, and that's what this text formula is going to be doing, or text function, excuse me, going to be doing. So we go ahead and wrap that skill level in text, so it becomes a text value. And then I'm going to actually go ahead and what's called concatenate. That's what that ampersand does.
Hey, Christian, it looks like we lost your audio. Not sure if you can hear me.
Christian, if you can hear us, we lost you right after the ampersand.
Just give him a second to see if we can reconnect audio. Christian, are you able to hear us? And he was on a roll. Just trying to get a hold of him. Looks like he's in a zone though, because he's continuing on with his presentation. All right, we're gonna switch gears just a little bit. Hope that Christian can reconnect audio and pick up right where we dropped him there. So I'm going to fast forward here 1 second, and we're going to invite JP to tell us a little bit about Shift3 technology. So JP, let me hand this over to you.
Okay,
And
sounds
you can,
good. Hello. I kind of in one of those situations where you know, you're the opening band and the headliner needs some time, and there's someone on the side of the stage going, stretch, Stretch. So hi, my name is JP Prendergast. I am with Shift 3 Technologies. I work with Christian and with Janae. Want to thank everybody for being here today. Obviously, great information from James. I thought that was really cool, and especially for us and for the company that we work for, Bitwise Industries, the larger company, because of our proximity to Merced and to a lot of the things that he was discussing. But what I would like to do is just take this time to tell you a bit about Shift 3, and as I mentioned, the parent company that we are a part of, Bitwise Industries. So Bitwise actually, again, just a little bit south of Merced, and I know that online the geography makes not a whole lot of difference, but again, a city that's certainly close to us geographically and then close to our hearts as well. So Bitwise is a technology movement that started in Fresno, started about 7 years ago, and I do deliberately choose the word movement as opposed to company, because the impetus behind all of this was the idea that you could use technology as a way to revitalize an area, and so the vision became a three-pronged approach that clearly referred to as infrastructure, workforce, and industry. So on the infrastructure side, what we did in Fresno was we invested in real estate, and the point of that is prior to the inception of Bitwise, there was a great deal of entrepreneurship and startup technology here in our Central Valley. You hear about even obviously what Gallo's Farms is doing. I mean, people coming up with very great, very unique solutions to problems in ag and in the startup world and all sorts of other industries as well. The challenge was that as these companies grew locally, they seemed to hit a critical mass where invariably they would say, well, if I want to really succeed, if I'm serious about this business growing, if I'm serious about these great ideas and technology I have, I need to relocate to a larger market. And so, right as our local talent was really blossoming, it ended up being kind of harvested and taken elsewhere. So the building side was representative of a community of technology and really encouraging that, yes, you can do that here in the Central Valley. You can do this in Merced and Bakersfield. And so we started off with one small building on the north end of downtown Fresno. It was about 8,000 square feet. That was 7 years ago. We now have 8 buildings. We have 4 in downtown Fresno, 2 in Bakersfield, which, if you're familiar with the Central Valley, about an hour and a half to the south of us, and then in Merced as well, which of course is the theme for this particular webinar. So and then in some other markets as well, but the point being is really providing these rally points in what we would otherwise define as underserved markets. So so great, we encourage people to stay local, to grow their tech companies here in the Central Valley. It's a promise that we make that they can grow, and part of that obviously is the workforce component. You need the developers to actually be those boots on the ground, those fingers on the keyboard to make these projects grow and literally develop. So we started Geekwise Academy, which Christian illustrated in the work that he was doing. Geekwise Academy is actually the #1 vocational tech school in the US for coders and developers. As you can see by the slide here, over 6,000 students have graduated, and that statistic actually is I think from the beginning of this year. So that number has continued to grow, even with everything that we're facing with the coronavirus, continuing to teach classes online and bring students along. So it's been a great way to really help our local companies grow. So providing opportunities for the companies, but also for individuals as well, people that may not otherwise have been exposed to technology, to have an opportunity to pursue that and to ideally transfer to maybe what have traditionally been jobs and transfer those into careers in tech. So I'm super proud of everything that Geekwise is doing. And then on the industry side, the idea that, okay, great, we've created a tech community through the infrastructure. We have created a world-class workforce through Geekwise. Shift 3 represents the industry side as far as providing development resources for these entrepreneurs to grow, for people that have ideas that they want to build from scratch, and for our local businesses that, again, as James mentioned, wanted to utilize technology to scale up and to deal with challenges that they face. So that's Bitwise Industries as a whole. Would like to focus a little bit on the Shift 3 component now, if I could. So Shift 3 is a custom software development firm, and we do Salesforce as well. We started off primarily on the custom development side and realized that with the robust nature of Salesforce, and again, the example that Christian will get us back to is a great example of how robust it is. We found that there were a lot of similarities with that, being almost like custom software, and so the high level of configuration was a great fit for us there. So we do full stack development. We do application builds for browser and downloadable, Salesforce, as I mentioned, and then kind of harkening back a bit to the larger mission of Bitwise, we are very conscious about providing opportunities to people that traditionally have not been embraced by the technology sector. And so we are proud to boast one of the more diverse development and tech teams really in the state and probably in the country as well. So a little bit about our team. We have Irma, who is our CEO and one of the founding members of Bitwise, and is now CEO, as I mentioned, of Shift 3. Janae, who put this together. Thank you very much, Janae. And then Chris and Corey represent sort of a two-pronged approach on how we deliver and how we are continually improving from the DevOps side. So Chris's responsibility is making sure that when we are committing resources to a project, that we are adhering to our timelines, that we are presenting our milestones, that our clients are seeing their visions come to life. And while he's making sure the product is coming out, Corey is on the back end making sure that we're providing the best internal practices possible. Built our QA team, is constantly providing new methodology and new approaches to make sure that we're providing the most quality product possible for our clients. And then on our business development side, there's me. I oversee our custom software development side from the business development aspect, and also the Salesforce side. And then we have Amber as well, who's one of our dedicated Salesforce solutions representatives, and she is in San Diego, and actually will be speaking at our next webinar. So that'll be very exciting for those of you that have been on these and heard me do this before. So change in the lineup coming up. Shift 3's advantages. Again, these are things that we have learned through custom software development, and again, applied those to Salesforce as well, just because there's a lot of compatibility between the two. So the planning side really is an excellent example of one of our competitive advantages, and we'll get into that in a little bit as far as what that process looks like, because it is pretty universal as far as what an idyllic relationship looks like between you as a client and a vendor that you have in place that's providing either custom development resources or also Salesforce administrators or development resources as well. So that's been a big one for us, and again, really getting that understanding of what it is that we want to accomplish. Christian did a great job of illustrating that, of when a request comes in, really being analytical about it, not being what we would traditionally call, an order taker, but being a consultant and really saying, okay, well, here's the request. Let me make sure that I'm not just executing on this, but really developing a solution that I know, based on my interaction with our clients, is going to provide them with not just the information they need, not just with the executable that they're asking for, but in a way that really makes sense and resonates and makes the information very clear and attainable. So definitely something that we apply across the board, regardless of our discipline. So with that, tell you a little bit more about some of our skill sets. Obviously, the implementation and consulting on the Salesforce side. I'm going to ask Christian if those examples that he's using are from actual clients of ours, but kind of give you a little bit of a chance to see behind the curtain as far as what the consulting looks like when a request comes in, how we process it and formulate a solution. So that was awesome. That would also fall a little bit under our staff augmentation, where we lease out resources or work alongside existing development teams to help execute a project or a product. And then again, the QA I mentioned, and the different custom software applications that we build as well, which actually are very nice because, as you know, with Salesforce, it does a number of things. Does a number of things very well. However, it's nice to have additional resources so that you can bolt on things as needed that exist outside of the Salesforce domain. So Shift3 built a couple of projects that were in response to the coronavirus outbreak, one of which Onward CA, which you may know about, or if you are viewing from a state other than California, it's Onward and then whatever your state abbreviation is. And that is a Salesforce platform. It is utilized to connect people in need of job services or resources, people that have been displaced by the virus, and they are able to utilize this as a platform. And Salesforce is working a lot of the back end, but we did integrate some other technologies on the front end to make it more presentable and to execute on some other things that we wanted to provide outside of the Salesforce domain. So a little bit of an example there. The next thing I'd like to go over, this is really our, like I said, the ideal customer journey. I don't want to say it's the Shift3, this is how we process things, but as I mentioned earlier, this is a universal approach to how this relationship should work. We'll talk about how it applies really in a Salesforce setting, just because that's obviously the interest that everyone has for being a part of this. And again, thank you for being here. So obviously, the first thing that we're doing is looking at initiating the engagement there, which is basically really just meeting the people you're going to be working with. Ideally, you're going to have a long-term relationship with your developer. That certainly is the goal, that it is a resource that you work well with, that understands your objectives, and that becomes a part of your team. And so making sure that this is someone that really resonates with you, that they have an approach that fits with what your objectives are, is crucial. And so you definitely want to establish that very much right off the bat. I know that sounds very common sense, but certainly worth shining a bit of a light on. From there, once engaged, you really want to look at the immersion side, and that is where the development team or the administrators that you're working with are really getting in and understanding your business. And again, this is what prevents us from being order takers that just say, okay, you need this thing there. Sure, but there's an interpretation that comes with that. So it is more than just a request. It is, we always say the technology is not the end, it's the means to the end. And so what is the end? What is the purpose of the question? What additional information can we glean to make sure we provide the right solution? And so we spend a lot of time really understanding our clients. And then when we do, sort of pushing things forward and saying, hey, you were telling us that your needs were X, Y, and Z. Here's what we interpreted that as, and getting that feedback from our clients, and then really kind of cycling through immersion and envision until we get to a point where we're like, you know what, we do have a clear understanding now. I'm glad that we talked about it. Now let's move into the execution phase. So the execution is going to be exactly what Christian was showing us earlier, and we'll let him get back to here. Yes, a request comes in. Okay, here's how I'm going to execute that. I'm going to get it in front of you to show you what it looks like, and that would fall into the validation stage. And at that point, our clients say, yeah, thank you, this is what we saw, or we're 80% of the way there, but I'd like to make the following changes, in which case it pushes back to execution and validation. And so again, both those immersion, envision, and execute and validate, those are kind of loops, but they're absolutely crucial to make sure that we are customizing the approach. And that's really the whole point of that, of having an admin with a configurable platform like Salesforce that we're all very vested in. Obviously, that's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of effort, and we're using this to run our organization. So making sure that we're taking the time to really validate these requests as they come through. And then finally pushing those to production or delivery, where they're actually in the hands of the end users and being applied. So with that, I do want to get back to Christian's demo. I'm excited to see where he's going with it next, and it's certainly been cool to see, from my end, being more on the pre-development side, to see, hey, when these requests comes in, this is what it looks like to actually deliver on those. So with that, Janae, I will hand it back to you to hand to Christian if you're all set.
Sounds good. All right, Christian, we are hoping that we can hear you. We were all, I think, at the edge of our chairs waiting for the next part of that. So I just handed controls back to you, and I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Hopefully you all can hear me. You gotta love doing something live, right? You know it's not recorded.
Yeah.
All right. So back to where we left off. We made this formula for the skill icon that the user can see. I believe you saw it, but I will go ahead and review it. We'll save it, go back to the record, and you can see that this image is here. It'll switch with the value that changes. So it'll show the intermediate image that we want to show when that pick list is at the intermediate. And this value, this image, can actually be put into our front end website design, just like JP was saying when he was talking about Onward, we do some of this logic so that Gauge can come over from our Salesforce org into our website. So it's a great way to display info, both for the user on the Salesforce side and maybe potentially on web pages if that works for your org. So back to the slides here. The third business requirement that we have is for our hashtag co-workplace. They use a service called Stripe to manage their cards and their financial information. And so they have that info in Salesforce, the Stripe ID and Stripe subscription for their members, but they want to have a better way for those two to connect. So I'll go ahead and check out that object. I know they use this membership object. I have this one built in for this demo. So it has basic values that's relevant to their workflow, the membership start date, number of members, things like that. The thing that this business requirement was talking about is this subscription ID. This subscription ID is what Stripe uses to know this subscription goes to this person. But in Salesforce right now, it's just a text value, not very useful. It just sits there. But we can do something better with that. So let's go ahead and go to the object manager and find that object. That was the membership object. Scroll down. Whoop, too far. Find membership, there it is. Building relationships, and we're going to build another formula. Go ahead and select that. This one I'm going to call subscription. And this is going to be a text value because I actually wanted to return a link that I can click on as the end user. So to do that, I'm going to find this hyperlink function over here. I know already exists. Go ahead and insert that. And we see again here that skeleton with those parameters for it. We don't need this optional value, so I'll take that out. And then we just need our URL and the friendly name, which is how it actually displays to the user. So I'm going to go ahead and take this URL out and put the value we want in there. So I'll go ahead and bring that over. There we go. Maybe I'll zoom in for you, make it a little easier to read too. That would help. And so here we have this default link. But in Stripe, that subscriptions page that it's currently set at doesn't actually exist. It needs an actual ID. So just like we did right before the audio cut out, we can use the ampersand to concatenate two strings together. So I'm going to go ahead and find that subscription ID we saw on the record, insert it, and now this link will go to the subscription ID record in Stripe. I'm going to put the friendly name to the same to the Stripe subscription ID as well, so that way the link still has the info that the user may need. If they want to do something manually, they can still see the actual ID number just in case they need it for reference. So I'll go ahead and check syntax. Everything passed, that's great. Let's go ahead and go through these last screens. Again, I'm good with the default visibility here and the page layout, so I'll save it. And we'll head back over to our membership record and check it out. Let's refresh it. There's our subscription right up here. That looks like it's a link. Let's go to it and see if it connected correctly. The link looks right up on top, and there's our data. There is the subscription for this membership. So you can see, as the business requirement asks for, they can now click that link in one click. They can get into Stripe and maybe pause or cancel a payment, see previous information. So that really helps automate this step. They don't have to bounce around and do some manual searching. So that should satisfy that requirement. It looks like we have another requirement here from hashtag that is regards to revenue. They want to know how much revenue a month they get from each of their memberships. So I'm going to head back to the memberships. Go ahead and get out of Stripe here. I'm going to go back to that field and reference and make a new formula to do that calculation. So this formula is similar to some of the other ones we've done. So I'm going to just go ahead. First, I'll fill out the name here. This one's going to be our revenue month. So this is our monthly revenue for each membership. Put that in. It's going to be a currency because we're doing dollar amount. And I'm going to just go ahead and paste this one in and just talk about it briefly. So this is another case formula, case function. And as you can see, if the membership was student, we would return the 29 because that's the value for a student membership, individual, things like that. So again, here you can see the value of a case statement. These yearly ones are interesting in that they pay one price for the year. So if we want monthly revenue, we just do a little math, divide it by 12, and then we have that revenue. I'll check the syntax. We're good. And then we'll go ahead and go through these pages again. So you can imagine this info would be great just to know the revenue that's coming in from your business. It's great for reporting and dashboards in Salesforce if you're familiar with those. It's a great way to get that breakdown of information. So here on the record, we have that revenue by month there. And if you were to change the type, it would reflect that, just like the image that we've seen previously. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to our next business requirement. This is our last one. It's about our idea assessment object, which we use for scoring ideas. And they would like to just see their specific idea, their specific scorecard. I'm going to go ahead and show you the record very quickly, just so you're familiar with the functionality of it. That's always something we like to do, is make sure we know what's there. Basically, it looks like we have tick list values and a weight, and that translates to a number. That's how they're doing the scoring. There's a status of in progress. And if I were to change it, we should see a change happen with these formulas. And it looks like there's plenty of those going down, and all the way through, there's a nice total score at the bottom. Okay, so that makes sense for this object, but the requirement is just to see their own assessment. So that's actually a very quick formula that comes in handy. So back in settings on the assessment object, we'll go through and go through and make a new formula that is going to be right there. I'm going to call that my assessment. So that way I know it'll tell me yes or no. That's going to be a checkbox whether this is my assessment or not. And I'll go ahead and insert this. So what we're going to do here is we have that field. I don't know if you noticed, there's a WRD user. That's the user this assessment was assigned to. For these assessment objects, one person creates them, so they create 5 and they assign them to the different people that need a score. So we can't use some of the default things that Salesforce does for that situation because the person who needs to see it isn't the creator. So using this formula, I can now use the user it's assigned to, and using the values not on the record, but for the system information, there's a user. I can go grab the user ID for the current user and see if they equal. If they equal, then it's my assessment. If it's not, then it's not. So I'll go ahead and hit next. If there was a syntax error, it would have popped up. There wasn't. I'll go ahead and go through, save it, go back to our assessment. And we're going to see that checkbox. So on this record, it's not so much helpful to see that checkbox. It's there, but it's not important because you can kind of see who the user is. Right now we're Salesforce support. But if I go to the home page, I had this list view right now that shows incomplete assessments. But I wanted just to show mine. Right now it's showing mine with Salesforce support as well as another user. So I'm going to go ahead and use this new formula to help filter this report. So this list view, excuse me. So I'll go ahead and edit the list filters. Add a new filter that's going to be that my assessment we just created. So I'm going to scroll down to it. We want the ones that are true because I only want to see mine. I will save it. And as you can see, that other one is gone. So now I'm just seeing my assessments that I have not marked as complete. If I go to the home page, I'll see that reflected there as well. As you can see, it's a very useful tool to help get the data, get the information that your client is asking for. So with that, I'll leave you with some references here in the slides for further use and further information about formulas. There's some great Trailhead modules that can be a little challenging, but they're full of great information. There's also the Salesforce help docs that describe each formula and how to use them. That's a great reference. And finally, I have here a Shift3 blog post that one of members of our team has written about formulas that talk about some of these topics as well as some others that might be useful for your org. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Janae and see if we have any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Christian. It does seem like everyone was literally on the edge of their seats waiting for you to come back on. So I'm glad that we got those technical issues worked out. We do have a few questions that have come in. So how do you determine when to use case or if function?
Just like kind of I was talking about, it kind of depends on the situation. Cases are great for pick lists. Because if you use an if statement, you have to use a pick val function like we had in the slides. So generally, cases are great for pick list values. If this pick list is this value, do this. That's what they're great for. There's some also to be aware of. Cases can't always return. They can't return a true or false. They have to return either numbers or text. So that's something to also consider with those.
Okay. What happens if you can't make something work as a formula?
That's a great question. Like I was talking about in the beginning, formulas are your first level of automation, but there are others. So if it doesn't work as a formula, what we do as when we're dealing with clients is we go to our next level of automation, which is Process Builder, see if we can do it there. And if you can't do it there, we go up to Flows, which is another complex tool. And finally, we start looking into code options as a last resort. The reason we do that in that order is so that admins and users can easily make changes to declarative things like that before we get to code. So that way it helps with maintainability and ease of access for multiple admins.
Okay, great. There are more questions, but I'm just going to ask you one more in the interest of time. What are the best ways to troubleshoot syntax errors?
That's a good one. A lot of that is practice, I'll be honest. It's knowing, it gives you an error a lot of the times, and it can be helpful. Sometimes it cannot be. So it's good to look at the documentation. If, for instance, maybe your skeleton's wrong, or you're missing a parenthesis or a comma, those are really common errors. So it's good. It's a good first check to look for those. And when we're talking about styling, if you style it well, it helps you see those type of errors because you can see how things are supposed to line up. So you'll see if something's missing.
All right, great. Like I said, there were some more questions in there. So if you had other questions on this call, feel free to email those over to me and I will get those to Christian and or James and we can get those answered for you. Christian, thank you so much for covering all of that today. I really appreciated it. It sounds like other people really enjoyed the topic as well. So the next webinar in our series will happen on Tuesday, June 4th at 9 a.m. This particular webinar will feature Jeff Scott, and he'll be going through a brand new chapter 3 of digital storytelling. So for those of you who have been on our past webinars and have heard Jeff speak, he's going to give you even more insight into how to make your data tell a story. We will also have Jacob Aguilar, who spoke at one of our very early sessions and was very well received. He'll be talking about automation and how to use it and why. So all of the details for California Trailblazer series can be found online at caltrailblazers.com. And as I said at the beginning, we would like to send you a little gift if this is your first time attending one of our California Trailblazer series webinars. So at the conclusion of this webinar, you should receive what looks like a survey, but it's really just asking for your mailing address. With so many people working from home right now, we don't have your mailing address if you're not in the office. So if you would like to receive a gift from us, please go ahead and fill that out, or you can reply to the email that I'll be sending out later today, which will include a full recording of today's session as well as a link to register for the next session. Again, that's on June 4th. And with that, I will say thank you, and we hope to see you in a couple of weeks. Have a great week. Bye-bye.